Hello and welcome to the second talk of our parish mission. Today is Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Lent, and I wanted to continue our little mission on evangelization, building on one of the points from today's gospel that I've always found to be both comforting and disturbing. When Jesus says to his disciples when they ask him, "Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus says, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This man is blind so that the glory of God might be revealed in him." Now, on one level, that dispels the obvious statement that we can make is that some person or individual person suffering is a direct result of their own sin. Sometimes we can easily make that assumption, where we encounter a person going through tremendous travail and suffering and pain, and we often ask ourselves, what did this person do to deserve this? It is so ingrained in us that it's hard to extricate. And in fact, one of the central images of our Christian faith, which is the crucifix, contradicts it. Lord, who sinned that you should suffer so much? And the answer is, you did. I don't know how to feel about that, but it's at the core of it. And part of the reason I find it so disturbing is that when Jesus says that about the man born blind, is that it doesn't help the man born blind when he was 5, 6, 7, 8, young kid growing up, wondering why everyone else can see and he can't, why he's reduced to a life of begging on the streets. And sadly, his own tumultuous or tempestuous relationship with his parents. So sometimes the blessings of God are a strange thing, and we often seek some of God's great blessings. But sometimes in our attempt or seeking after blessings, we often bring ourselves the flip side of the blessing, which is also maybe a curse. When the God of Israel promises himself to his people, he says to them through Moses and eventually through Joshua, "I am giving to you both life and death, a blessing and a curse. Choose life so that you and your ancestors may live in the land that I am giving you." And so the great covenant that God gives his people has this two-edged dimension to it. The great blessings that God will give Israel through the covenants also has the dimension that if they do not live up to the covenants, then they will suffer for it. And that's not so fun. And this is one of the reasons why it's really important that before we start embarking on big promises to God, we must count the cost, which is precisely what I tried to title this particular mission when it was at least back in the bulletin. In fact, it had two titles: Descensus Inferno, Counting the Cost, the importance of mission and evangelization in the church. Because the cost of evangelization is to enter into the lives of those to whom you are preaching the gospel to. But what happens when their lives are those of suffering? Are you willing to enter into them? And are you prepared to go the whole journey? Because sometimes if we're not willing to go the whole journey, we can actually make their problems worse. Christianity opens up questions and dimensions that would never exist in a pre-Christian environment. The very character of suffering hurts more when you believe in an all-knowing and all-loving God. If you live in a pagan world where the gods control you and don't like you, then you can be happy when you're blessed, but when you're suffering, that's normal. But when you describe a God who loves you, who creates you, then when you're suffering and in pain or alone and isolated, then the pain becomes worse. And despair is not so much being saturated in sorrow, but having experienced a hope that died. And so this is why the evangelist must always be cautious in preventing himself or herself from preaching their own gospel. Because often our own idols destroy us, but we must be cautious that our idols don't destroy the lives of another. But here's the problem. We don't know what our idols are. This is one of those reasons why it's important to go out, is that evangelizing, you discover what you treated as God might not be God. This paradox always befuddled me or confused me or even scandalized me when I read the gospel according to John, when Jesus promises his disciples that persecutions will come, that it is something that they will not be able to avoid. But in being persecuted, he also warns them this: if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, because I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all this they will do to you on my account, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned. But now they have no excuse for their sin. He who hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would have not sinned. But now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. It is to fulfill the word that is written in their law. They hated me without a cause. But when the Counselor comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness to me. And you are also witnesses, because you have been with me from the beginning. I said all this to you to keep you from falling away. They will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think they are offering service to God. When you read a passage like that and think about its implications, then it also then means that we must be cautious in assuming that our opponents are in fact, are they working against us or working against God? Very often when we judge, criticize, or tear people down, we might be shocked to discover that we were the persecutors and not them. And so one of those important tasks in evangelization is to realize what one's motivations are. What is our drive? What moves us? Which is why one of the great saints that helped evangelization a great deal is St. Ignatius of Loyola, who is the founder of the order, the Jesuits, that St. Francis Xavier was a member of, that went all the way to Japan. This thought of, what are your motivations? What are your drives? What is that first fervor that drew you to be a missionary for the gospel? And this spiritual and psychological awareness of what motivates a person and what motivates the evangelist became the seed ground, if you will, for the Jesuit method. And so it is not a coincidence that the Jesuit mission to Japan had this dimension. Now, the sad part was, and as I mentioned in the last talk, I suspect that the Western missionaries had not yet fully examined themselves. But I don't know. And frankly, it's not my place to judge. And I don't want to. But I will use a book to help describe this situation. It was a book written by a Japanese Catholic by the name of Shusaku Endo, by the name of Silence. And originally, this helped me kind of work through a whole series of the problems that I'd like to reflect upon as we begin to reflect on the nature of missionary work in general. The very beginning of the book, or the whole premise of the book, is about two young Jesuits who decide to go to Japan to help alleviate the suffering of the church there. And in their journeys, they also discover that their old formator and guide and mentor, Father Ferreira, by all accounts, has renounced the faith and apostatized. Hearing this, they become even more filled with fervor to go to Japan. Now, we will cover this story over the next few videos, but what I want to focus on today is that fervor that sent these two young priests by the name of Rodriguez and Garpe. Rodriguez is the main character or main priest in the book, and Garpe is his companion. Now, they also had a third friend named Father Santa Maria, but who never actually makes it to Japan due to illness. He has to stay behind. But just before they're about to leave, they are instructed by their superior, Father Valignano, that they can't go. They're told to stay behind. They're told that the persecution in Japan is too terrible, and therefore they cannot go. Now, Fathers Rodriguez and Garpe, and Santa Maria, for that matter, they insist that they should go. And so Father Valignano relents and lets them go. Now, that always perturbed me a little bit, because these two young priests, when they asserted their desire to go, one of the things that they articulated rather plainly was that they thought that the accounts of Father Ferreira apostatizing were a slander. And not only that, if the slander was allowed to continue, it would shame and humiliate the Jesuit order, Portugal, the Church herself. When Jesus Christ begins his missionary work to the world, because we must never forget that our Lord Jesus is a missionary. He's the apostle sent from the world, from God. When he preaches to us, he not only reveals who God is, but he also reveals humanity to itself. He reveals us to ourselves. And Jesus knows every part of us and loves us in a peculiar way. And I say peculiar because it's hard to figure out why. There is a passage in the Gospel according to St. John that underlines the entire book called Silence. There's a line constantly repeated from John's Gospel, and it is found here. When Jesus had thus spoken, he was troubled in spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was lying close to the breast of Jesus. So Simon Peter beckoned him and said, "Tell us who it is of whom he speaks." So lying thus close to the breast of Jesus, he said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give this morsel when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why Jesus said to him thus. Some thought that because Judas had the money, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he immediately went out, and it was night. What you will do, do quickly. Throughout the book, Father Rodriguez reflects on this line, and he spends a long time trying to interpret its meaning. Later on in the book, he does actually confess that he went through a number of his formators and friends when he was in the seminary to try to figure out what on earth was Jesus saying to his disciples when he's referring to Judas and saying, "What you are to do, do quickly." What was Jesus feeling when he said that? Was it contempt? Was it anger? Or maybe it was pity. Maybe Jesus knew, and I say maybe Jesus knew, being a little joking here, he did know. He did know. But he knew long before. He knew when he picked Judas as a disciple. In fact, the gospel doesn't do spoiler alert. Judas was going to betray them the whole time. Right from the start, it says, and Judas Iscariot, who was a traitor. So the heart of Judas is already revealed to Jesus, but not to Judas. And this is one of those things that humility demands. That we want to be able to give Jesus our whole heart and soul and strength. And sometimes Jesus says only that much. Now, our pride can say, no. Give me more, Lord, give me more. But the Good Shepherd knows his sheep and knows what they're capable of. Very often we can be tempted to do more than we can, like a child that says, no, I can do it, no, I can do it, no, I can do it, no, I can do it. And the good and loving Father says, I know what you can do, but you can't do that. Now, very often what the good Father will do is not draw attention to the limitations of his beloved. But if we constantly insist on what the right thing is, then maybe over time, God's wisdom will be revealed. All things in this world will work unto good for those who love God. And yet sometimes us revealing that we do not love God as much as we would like might be a part of that revelation. It might be the occasion for a new kind of mercy. Because at that very same meal, Jesus says to the Apostle Peter, all of you will run, all of you will abandon me, but go. And after I've risen from the dead, go to Galilee, and there you will see me. And so the other figure, very much like Judas, comes up and chimes in and says, Lord, if everyone were to deny you, I would not deny you. I will never abandon you. Is that so? Before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. This thought that sometimes when God says no to us, it's not because God is being cruel and capricious. When God says, you can't go on mission yet, there is more for you to do, we do need to take him at his word. Now, Fathers Rodriguez and Garpe insisted through their superior that they were prepared for this mission and that they had chosen it and that they had accepted it. But they did do so out of a love for the Lord or out of personal pride. Now, as I mentioned, their motivation was to hide the shame of the apostasy of Father Ferreira. They were convinced that a man as strong as them, their paragon actually, would never apostatize. Because what would that say about them? What would that say about the whole mission? What would that say about the church? If someone that they loved and trusted so much could fail. And so they had to go and protested their superior. Now, the virtue of obedience is an important one for any evangelist. Because the perilous nature of the human heart, we don't know what's in us. We really don't. And that's the purpose of the church, is to allow other people to temper our passions and to temper our desires. Because there's no shortage of righteousness, but there's a shortage of wisdom. There's a shortage of humility. So Fathers Rodriguez and Garpe insist on their mission, and they go. And the sad thing is that when Father Santa Marta obviously cannot go with them anymore, they say to him in an almost patronizing tone, "We will go, but you will come after us." But in the end, I doubt that they really wanted him to come or even thought that he could come. They waited a long time to find a ship that would bring them from Macau into Japan, because it was a perilous journey. As I already mentioned, it was long, and if they were to go on a Portuguese ship, then the English or the Dutch would fire upon them. The Japanese were covering the borders very, very tightly, and so they would have to come in at night. So eventually they do find a guide to bring them along, and they commission a junk ship to take them. Their guide is a Japanese by the name of Kichijiro. And Kichijiro is a drunk and pathetic individual. And eventually, when they find out that he could take them to Japan, then they discover that he might also be a Christian, but Kichijiro vociferously denies it and says, "I am not a Christian." And throughout the journey to Japan, they discover that this shifty character is not to be trusted. He'll fawn over authority figures and the captain of the ship, but then the moment that it comes time that the authority figure is no longer looking at him, then of course he drops his work and acts in a lazy fashion. When others beat him up due to his deception and laziness, it does not change his character, but makes him more cunning. There's this image of Kichijiro throughout the book of constantly rubbing his hands and plotting and scheming. Now, the moment they finally do land in Japan, Kichijiro runs off. And eventually, they're found by some Christians in a small little village that Kichijiro, by whatever means, has gotten to know. And they're able to bring the faith there. These two priests start celebrating the sacraments in the hidden way in which these Japanese Christians had been living for decades. They discover that this Christian church had been operating in secret, and they had found among their midst a suitable leader who could not be ordained because there was no bishop, but would be, in a sense, their lead and guide, their jisama, which is the phrase. Ichizo is his name. And Ichizo, as the jisama, would baptize, catechize, and lead in prayer. But the moment that these two priests show up, Ichizo steps back and gives them their paternal role, in a sense echoing the phrase, "They must increase, I must decrease." This humble reverence for the meaning of the sacraments. So these priests eventually start baptizing, hearing confessions, celebrating Mass, but they're given a stipulation that they must hide. In fact, they live almost in a little cavernous hole that had been prepared for them. Not prepared for them, but prepared, that they would stay in. And there's a small moment when these two priests say, "Now that we're here, you need to go to the neighboring villages and tell them that priests are here." And the whole village kind of lowers their head and goes, "I don't think you get it, buddy. We don't know who's in the next village. We don't know who's here. We don't know who's there. We don't know who can be trusted." Because there's a price on the head of each Christian. There's an even greater price on the head of a religious brother. And there's a very high price for the head of a priest. And it's in the factors that these small peasants could easily be tempted by. And so the two young priests slightly relent. But you can tell that they always have this desire to go off into the missions. So living underground for a while, there's a few funny moments. One in particular is when Garpe is watching others watch him eat. He's watching others watch him eat food. And they laugh at him because he's eating in a strange manner. And he gets angry and chides them and says, "This is how I'm eating so funny." But what's adorable is that him and Rodriguez are also looking at the Japanese as if they are acting in a strange way. This leads to an interesting little dialectic where the priests are being exalted by a local community that is both thankful that they're there but cautious about them. And at the same time, these priests are humbly serving, but the benefit that they get is the admiration. Now, it's not just they that suffer the temptation of admiration, but Kichijiro himself. Eventually, Kichijiro kind of disappears. And the two priests then receive knocks on their door, asking them to go to another village. And eventually, they relent and come out, and it turns out that, yes, Christians from a nearby village are asking them to help. So the priests dutifully go. Actually, just one. Because the danger of them going would cause too much danger for the local villages, so only Rodriguez goes. And he's filled with life when he arrives because he is able to be what he set out to be in the beginning. A missionary, baptizing and preaching the gospel, just as St. Francis Xavier had so desperately pleaded that Europeans would come and bring the faith, and rightly so. But soon after, word gets out that there was a complication. Rodriguez finds out that Ferrer is alive. Great. He also notices that Kichijiro is putting on airs in this new village. One of his funny little lines is to say, "Nothing bad will happen to you as long as I am with you," says Kichijiro. But as this develops, word gets out that they've been found out. Ichizo has been taken hostage, and they are warned that more hostages will be taken unless the hidden Christians are exposed. And this leads to a harrowing tale. Eventually, 3 other hostages are brought forward. A local man from the village who had up until then been known as quite the hothead and surprised everybody by his willingness to be brought forward as a hostage, Ichizo and Mokichi. But because of a panic inside the community, they also bring forward Kichijiro. They say, "You're not from our village. You should go in our place." And what's so touching and disturbing about this at the same time is what the villagers are asking Kichijiro to do is to be like Christ for them. A foreigner from a different village must be willing to lay down his life for them. And he lets out a little squeal. "Padre, save me, help me." And the sad thing is, of course, is that the 2 people who do not come forward are not the 2 priests. And so 4 men are taken. 4 men are taken for interrogation to discover where these hidden Christians might be. Now, through all of this, they encounter a sweet old man who's interrogating them in this process. And he seems to be very deferential and understanding of their plight. He says, "I know you're all good people, and that you're not hiding anything. This is but a formality, and we'll see it through." So when these Christians are being interrogated, this old man appears again. They're told to fumi, which is to step on a sacred image of Jesus. Now, Father Rodriguez had instructed all of them to do it. And so to hide and to protect the village, they do it. But the old man notices that they quivered and resisted. So as they quiver and resist stepping on their Lord, he then pulls out a different test. Take a cross, spit on it, and say, your so-called blessed virgin is a bleep. And the three others can't do it. Only Kichijiro can. Kichijiro is allowed to go free, and the three other Christians are killed for their faith. The type of their martyrdom is of a peculiar kind. They're adhered to crosses, and on the shore of the sea are crucified before the oncoming tide as water smashes against them. Not only is there the pain of being hung on a cross for an extended period of time, but then there's the exhaustion of trying to hold yourself up and keep your breath. After several days, the three Christians die. One of them dies singing a hymn. We are on our way to paradise. We're on our way to paradise. Soon after the martyrdom, the two priests decide to split up. And in splitting up, they begin to feel the impact of their mission on these people. Had they not come, these people could have continued to live their faith in secret. But now that they are come, they've been exposed to great danger. Now that is a direct parallel of Jesus' words at the Last Supper. If I had not come, they would have had no sin. But now that I am come, then their sin is revealed. This then leads us to that frustrating question. Why then did Jesus come? If we could have lived nice, simple lives, unaware of our sinfulness, then how cruel is it that God has revealed himself? There is a cost, even in Jesus revealing himself. But this is the important part. Jesus knew the risk. He knew the danger, and he was willing to bear it. But did Rodriguez and Garpe? Now, they couldn't have. Simply by being human, they couldn't have. But at the same time, they were warned. They were told that this would be incredibly difficult and that the danger is great. But part of it is that they only thought about the danger to themselves and had not yet considered the danger that their presence would bring to other people. So much so that when they arrived, they immediately wanted others to spread word. But when you don't know the hearts of man, when you don't know the heart of your neighbor, and you don't know who to trust, that is a tall order. And this division between what you can see on the outside and what is on the inside is part of the human drama. Do you really want to know what's there? Because it can hurt. It can be incredibly painful. Then why do we do it? Well, I believe that the reason that we consider it worth doing is that we have to know that beyond all suffering, there is God. Now, in our own day, in the last week, I've had to think about this. I got a phone call, and I recorded this a few days ago. I got a phone call to visit the sick, and I did. I got another phone call to visit somebody else who was sick, and I went. And then later on, I thought that I might be sick with the fever. And then I realized I not only might have communicated the disease to the persons who were sick, but also to their families. All so that I might anoint them. Now, that is great. That's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, it causes one to pause, as it should. Would Jesus deny his mercy to those who by no other means couldn't get access to him? Would he refuse himself because of the incapacity of a weak and fragile priest who might himself be a disease carrier? When you preach the gospel, be very, very careful about your assumptions, because the diseases are not simply the viruses, there are attitudes. When we zealously want to give other people our religious opinions, we must be very cautious that although they might sound orthodox, they might not be Christ. One of those other disturbing mysteries in our Christian faith is that God is known by himself, but he's also believed in by the devil. The devil believes and shudders. He can speak a truth about God and poison it. Which is why I believe that Jesus hides his identity, especially in Mark's gospel. Although he has come to bring light and to reveal himself, when the demons say, "I know who you are," he says, "Be silent. Be silent and come out. Hold your peace." And so when we preach the gospel, it should never be used as a tool to subjugate, to win points, especially when it comes on the backs of another. Those 3 Christian martyrs died for their Jesus, died for Jesus. But that was their choice. Now, very often I find that a missionary or an evangelist goes to preach the gospel to others so that they might themselves be convinced of their own righteousness. I call it apostolic tourism. They go on a nice spiritual jaunt. They go to a place and do an act of mission or an act of service. And in the end, it's another feather in their cap. I'm able to demonstrate how much I believe and then put God back on his shelf. That nice little prison that we've created for him. Because I can say, "Look at all these beautiful things that I've done for you, Lord." When those 3 Christians gave their lives, the question was, and the question remains, who were they worshiping? Now, their faith was a beautiful one, and the testimony of these fictional characters echoes the faith of so many people. But when we preach, we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus is Lord. Be obedient, humble, and receptive. When you're given by a superior a challenge or a rebuke, even if you feel it to be unjust, trust it. The rebuke itself, you don't have to trust the guy giving it, but trust that the Holy Spirit will work through the church so as to purify your motives. Because even if you're right, you're probably not right enough. And who could possibly know? I can't. Maybe I made mistakes. Maybe I'm wrong in quarantining myself. Maybe I should have gone out there and done more. Maybe. But am I willing to die for myself first? That's the test. That's the question. And over the next few sessions, we will find out where the heart of Father Rodriguez lies, where strength of faith is revealed. And hopefully we'll discover in our own way and in our own community how to walk humbly with our God. See you next time.